Go through the top 5 rivalries in the NRL.
Australia.
Top 5 rivalries in Australia. But the honourable mentions, like you said, Brisbane and Cowboys usually have a decent rivalry. I mean, in terms of Australia-wide, Collingwood-Essendon have a really decent rivalry. Manly versus Melbourne all those years ago. Remember the big punch on with the Stewart brothers?
That kind of
everyone
drags
jumping
on.
in.
Dylan Walker, when he got bashed, they kind of dragged that Manly-Melbourne rivalry.
You got Nick Kyrgios, Tennis Australia. They never really get on. They're always going at each other. But I'll kick us off with the top 5 Australian rivalries. I'm going to go into the A-League. I was over at the Sydney FC, Western Sydney Wanderers game. It is pumping. Like, crowds are getting up. Yes, they got bashed 4-0. But I'm going to start us off with the Sydney FC versus the Western Sydney Wanderers. You don't have to be a big football fan to know that the derby gets up. Crowds go, whether it's at a game in Western Sydney, it's played at CommBank Stadium, or if it's at Allianz Stadium, the fans get right into it. There's flares going off in the crowd. I saw a Western Sydney goal, or multiple goals on the weekend. All of a sudden, people start throwing shit from the Sydney FC side, and they're throwing shit into the crowd. You don't get that in many other codes. The fans, they love it.
I think just to put into perspective how big that game was for the A-League. So over the weekend, you had Macarthur versus Melbourne City, crowd 2,100. You had Brisbane Roar versus Western United, crowd 3,400. And then you had Western Sydney versus Sydney with 28,900.
Yeah, and you just know A-League fans are rowdy. Yeah. That's what I think Rugby League and AFL are missing. Maybe less the AFL, but just rowdy fans are going to throw flares on the field. I love that shit.
Yeah, no, it builds an atmosphere, and I think the A-League need more of it, but that's one of the better rivalries in Australia.
And that takes us to number 4, the oldest rivalry in the NRL, Roosters versus the Rabbitohs. You just saw it on the weekend. It was a packed crowd at Allianz. It's one of the greatest rivalries in the NRL. It goes back to 1908. Every time they play, it's bad blood. You've got Joey Manu and Latrell going at each other, and now you've got the Instagram pages going at each other. So it's nice to see the rivalries transcend generations.
Yeah, I think it lived up to the hype on the weekend. Joey Manu again with an eye socket, a bit of a blowout, but they just get up for it. The media drums it up every week, every time that they play, and it's bad blood between the teams. There's also the case of poaching players from one another. Suwali was over there. They go and grab him. They've grabbed a lot of players. Angus Crichton. Even going back to the Brian Fletchers. So it's a rivalry that's lasted many years. It's going to continue going on into the future, but you love to see it, and it always lives up to the hype. Next one for me, rivalry number 3. I'm going the All Blacks versus the Wallabies. Now, we always take a shit on rugby union because it's probably struggling in Australia, but international rugby, you cannot fault it. It's always packing out 80,000 here in Sydney at least. And it's one thing that Australian rugby has for itself. The Wallabies going up against the All Blacks. We just want to get the better of the people across the Tasman.
Is it considered a rivalry if you lose every game, though? I don't think the Aussies have won a Bledisloe Cup in about 20 years.
I mean, over the last 5 to 10 years, it's been tough for the Wallabies. But you can't count us out every time we play against the All Blacks. It's a great rivalry. We got a mate, Dan, who live and die by the Wallabies.
Yeah.
He always gets up for it. He's always backing the Wallabies winners. I mean, in terms of rugby rivalries, what do you get up for in international rugby anymore? The All Blacks game, maybe the British and Irish Lions coming across, the Springboks maybe when they come over and play here, but that's about it.
It's always nice to see Australia get around the Wallabies, especially when they're versus the All Blacks. No one likes New Zealanders, especially here in Australia. I hate the All Blacks when they play them, and that's why it's one of the greatest rivalries. But that takes us to number 2, the greatest rivalry in the AFL, Carlton versus Collingwood. Now, they had Carlton and Collingwood play in round 1 against other teams, and they both packed out 80,000. When these two teams play each other, it's easily 90,000 at the MCG, and these crowds are going at each other.
They hate each other.
It goes back, another one that goes back all the way into the early 1900s, and you just see when they're playing, the crowds hate each other, the players hate each other, and it's just something that you see in the AFL. If you're going to go to an AFL game, go to a Carlton-Collingwood game, and it epitomises what AFL is.
Number 1, the best sporting rivalry in Australia has to be New South Wales versus Queensland in the state of origin. Now, I don't care if you're from Adelaide, Perth, what sport you watch, everyone gets up for origin, whether it's game on. I think it's one of the most watched sporting events in Australia. It's you just have to, like, I remember growing up as a kid, everyone would get around, you're going to your mate's house, or you just want to get behind your state. Like that's what it was all about.
It's always the talk of the town, and I don't think there's any other sport in the world, let alone Australia, where you'll get 2 club teammates who absolutely love each other, and then as soon as Origin starts, they'll have absolute disgust and want to kill each other on the field.
They hate each other. They hate each other on that game, and it stays on the field, takes away from clubland. The weirdest thing is you're going to get injuries out of that game because it's so physical. It's one of the most physical games of rugby league, and that's what the rivalry is all about. They bleed blue, they bleed maroon, and we grew up in the 2000s watching us get dominated by Queensland, and we're going through a period now where we hope we
should be winning, yeah.
We should be winning, but Queensland is still getting some on us. So it's one of the best rivalries in Australian history, and it will continue to be going forward.
Yeah, I don't see anything ever topping it, strictly just for the hate that New South Wales and Queenslanders have for each other. Even when you got people like Buzz Rothfield just saying, that's a Queenslander for you. It's just stuff that just will last forever.
Yeah, and we'll be there covering New South Wales and Queensland, whether it's in Sydney, in Perth, or at Suncorp this year. Looking forward to that. But